And sometimes we call it accountability, but then other times there is danger and there's an overwhelming nature with our thoughts getting the best of us, especially when those thoughts have been internalized and they begin to connect to past experiences, that there is some truth to it. Have you ever had a moment where maybe you were rejected, or you had a moment where something happened that did not go your way? And then, as opposed to just holding yourself accountable to maybe where you went wrong, your thoughts begin to tell you things like, see, I knew I couldn't do it, or see, I knew that I wasn't ready for this, or see, I knew I was wrong in this particular area, or I'm not good with this. And most of the times, those thoughts will connect back to past experiences, things that maybe happened in your childhood, or things that maybe happened when you were in grade school, or experiences that you've had with past people. You know, the enemy has a very unusual way, or a very usual way, if you will, of telling us things about ourselves that are not true, and then connecting those things to what are seeming to be bits and pieces of truth. And if we're not careful, then we can take ownership of whatever the enemy has planted by way of thought processes into our life. He can't stop you from becoming what you are supposed to be. He can't stop you from having what God has planned for you to have. But there's something that he does in the journey, inside of our thoughts, inside of our minds, that make us cower back, or that make us feel as though we're not worthy of walking after and receiving what God has for us. There's so many of us that there is a job for us. There is a business that we should start. There is a relationship that we should go after. But we allow the thoughts in our minds to begin to tell us that we're not worthy and that we can't do it. And so we never take after or take off after those things. And we hold ourselves back from being the people that God has ultimately created us to be. This is one of the plans that the enemy has planned, that we can see even in the very beginning. In Genesis chapter number 3, we see where the enemy comes in and he begins to speak to Adam and to Eve, and he shares with them that if you just partake this fruit, will you really die? This is a moment where he is telling a partial truth, because truth was they would not die in that moment. The truth was that that moment they were not going to die, but everything that would proceed from that point forward would be leading them closer and closer towards a death. He gave them a partial truth that they would not die, but they ultimately would. I want to ask you a question today. How many times have you had partial truths that you have built a whole entire identity on? How many times have you had a partial truth about yourself, or a partial truth about someone else that you have made a definitive choice concerning? Well, there's another phenomenon that we see in Genesis chapter 3, verse number 11, where after the enemy had tricked them, after the enemy had led them astray, we see God coming to them in the garden, and he asks them this question. He says, Adam said, he said, "Where are you, Adam?" And Adam said, "I was hiding because, I was naked." And God asked him a very unusual question. He says, "Who told you that you were naked?" It was the influence of the enemy from the circumstance. It was the influence of the enemy's illusions and the things that he had planted around him to trick him and lead him astray. I'm going to ask you a question today. Who told you that you were whatever it is that you've been repeating over and over again in your head? Where was that idea planted that you weren't good enough? Where was that idea planted that it was not for you? Where was that idea planted that you weren't strong enough, that you weren't smart enough, that you weren't good enough, talented enough to accomplish whatever the task was, to go after the goals that you have set in mind? Where was that thought planted? This past weekend, I had a moment where there was a circumstance that happened that I was not very happy about. As a matter of fact, not only was I not very happy about it, but in one particular moment, I actually felt very used for a moment. And that thought began to trickle down to another thought. And then that thought began to trickle down to another thought. I went down the rabbit hole, if you will, for just a few moments. And I didn't realize what was happening initially. I was driving, and as I was driving, I started thinking, well, why would that person do that? I don't understand. I was thinking it was going one way, and it was actually going another way. Had something to do with something that happened at my job, and I became so frustrated with myself. And then my mind began to connect back to past circumstances where something similar had happened. And I began to tell myself, see, you know what? You really don't matter. People really don't care. I went down that negative train of thought. And then eventually I started feeling bad. Not only did I start feeling bad, but it began to dim my hope for trying things for the future until I realized, wait a minute, this is what the enemy does right before it's a moment for us to cross over into what is planned for us. Because his goal and his hope is that he will disenfranchise you or get you so frustrated or get you so down the rabbit hole that eventually you won't believe in the power that God has planted inside of you to go after whatever your next place is. You see, the enemy did not want Adam and Eve to experience the luxury of everything that was planned in the Garden of Eden for them. The life that God had planned for them, the things that God had planned for them. And so he allowed one moment to trickle down, and then it began to tell them things that were not true. It began to reveal bits and pieces of truth, of consciousness to them that they should not have been aware of. You know, when I think back to me when I was a child, I think back to the earliest stages of me growing up and how when I was growing up, there was nothing that I did not believe I could do. I had affirming people around me that could tell me that I could do anything. And so I believed it and I went after it. The older you get, the more circumstances you experience, the more breakups you experience, the more moments of rejection you experience, the more moments where things are taken away from you that you experience. It begins to lessen your belief in what is possible. But I want to challenge someone today. I want to challenge you to remember that everything is possible and that every dream that you have, it absolutely can come true. That no matter how many times you have been rejected, no matter how many times things have fallen apart, I need you to know that you can get back from where you are because the dream is still possible for your life. I want to share this very transparent and very vulnerable moment with you all. And I'm hoping that this will help someone else. You know, I'm on this journey of singleness where I do desire companionship. I do desire to be um, in a relationship, married, whatever we desire, whatever we want to call it. You know, these days because we change names for everything so much. So, but I do desire that. And sometimes in this pursuit of desiring that, there are moments where I do feel very alone. And in those lonely moments, I challenge myself and I'll say, well, I see other people that are my age that have been married and they are happily married and they are, you know, moving into homes and moving across states or cross country, and they are living a life where they're posting about the amazing things that them and their spouses are able to do. And I would like that. And then in that spiral, my mind begins to say, well, maybe it's not for you. Maybe you're not relationship material. You're a good friend, but maybe you're just not relationship material. Maybe maybe you've messed up so much. Maybe this situation you messed up and that was your last chance. You see how your mind begins to play? Maybe that was your last chance. Maybe if you had done this right, then maybe this would have still been the case with this relationship. Or if you would do this right. And then I begin to go down this whole entire rabbit hole depicting things about myself that are probably somewhat accurate, but in truth, really don't stand the test of time because I am what God says I am. And what God has for me and what God has planned for me, it's going to happen. Why do I tell you that today? I tell you that today because there may be something in your life that you're desiring. And maybe there have been moments where you have spiraled down this negative train of thought where you're believing or thinking that it's not possible or that it's not going to happen. And to you today, you're the person that I would like to say, stop listening to that voice that told you that you can't. Who told you that you would not have it? I understand that there may have been a delay up to this point. I understand that things may look like it's not working towards the direction that you are hoping that it will go. But if God planted an idea inside of you, it's going to surely come to pass and it will happen. And even though right now it does not look like you're moving towards that or you are in that, you've got to stand to believe that at any given moment, God can turn and will turn everything around for you, and what you have been seeking and what you have been praying for and asking for, it will happen. That's the reason why God planted it in your heart. We've got to take control of the thoughts that would try to spiral us or that would try to take us down a whole negative path with just limited information. And sometimes, even with the truth that is standing in front of you, you've got to have a revelation of what God has promised you because the enemy is going to attack everything. And he's masterful in the art of illusion to make you give up on what it is that you've been holding on to. Friends, today I tell you, challenge your thoughts with asking yourself, who's telling me that? That's not what God says about me. God has promised me that it will happen. God has promised me that I'm the head, that I'm not the tail. God has promised me that I am above and I'm never beneath. God has promised me that I'm the lender and I'm not the borrower. God has promised me and given me revelation that he is a healer. That even though I may be dealing with this sickness, that God is a healer. That even though I may be dealing with this moment where there is a lack of peace, God is my peace. Even though I may be dealing with this moment where it looks like my finances are being messed with or like I don't have the money that's necessary to accomplish what I need to accomplish, God is my provider. He is Jehovah Jireh. There is a revelation for everything that we are being tasked with, that even though there is an illusion to tempt us to believe something different, even though there are voices that are speaking that would try to tear you down, even internal dialogue that would try to stop you from going after or believing what God says about you, I need you to remind yourself today. I need you to remind yourself that you can and you will, and that everything that God has for you, it will surely happen. I need you to go back after believing in yourself again like you used to. I need you to go back speaking kindly and positive to yourself about the things that you are going towards. And no matter what you are seeing, I need you to stand in faith and continue to tell yourself over and over again that it will happen because God promised and God said so. I am hoping that today helped you. I'm hoping that you've been encouraged just a little bit to go forward this week, not just this week, but for the rest of your life, into knowing the plans that God has for you will always prosper. And the things that God has promised you, they will always come to pass. And that even though you may be tested and even though you may be tried, don't co-sign with whatever the enemy is trying to navigate your mind to believe. I need you to believe higher for yourself. I want to thank you so much for watching, for being a part of my family, for jumping in every single week. Thank you to every one of my subscribers and every person that has followed me on every platform. I'm seeing you, and every time I see you, I start praying for you. Every time I see your name pop up in those notifications, I will say a quick prayer over you. Thank you so much to every person that sows and that subscribes. I am praying for your lives this week, and not just this week, but for the rest of your life, that this day there will be a turnaround for you and for your family. God bless you today. Thanks for